Hello, everyone, and welcome back yet again to your weekly episodes of Worth the Hype, right? WTH, right? As you can tell by the title, we are going to talk about the Zenith Primero, right? The Chronomaster, right? So, a brief history for those who are not aware of this particular watch is an extremely important watch to the history of chronograph. El Primero essentially means the first, I believe, in Spanish, and it's one of the first automatic movement, not the first, but one of the first. But most importantly, the first one with a high frequency movement, which is where often you see the 1/10 details over into the watch, right? And this particular watch, it's so important because without this watch, you do not have the lights of the Rolex Daytona, right? And essentially change the game for the entire automatic chronograph movement. Yeah. And I'll leave it the rest to Woody, right? Because this is probably where is Woody's realm of expertise. Yeah.
Oh, that's very kind of you, James. So, I mean, brief history, 1969, first high speed, so it's 1/10 of a second, high speed integrated chronograph. There's a lot of debate online about which the first was, because at that point in time, there was a Seiko, there was also a Hamilton Hoyer collaboration that led to what you now know as the Monaco, the left-hand side Monaco as well. But this was really the first in 1969 which put all of it together, a high-speed chronograph, so you can actually do a 1/10 of a second on even the current day models. And it is also the curse of the brand, because this is one of the few watch brands in the world that's more well known for its movement than it is for its watch models. So I think even until now, they're struggling to find a way to maneuver out of that. But I think we'll go into more detail there, and let's see what our thoughts are on this. But I do have a personal bias, positive bias on it. I am wearing one on my wrist, the previous edition. But we'll get through it as this whole show is subjective, so I'll try to be as objective as possible. We'll see how it goes. Back to you, James.
Cool. Right. Before we get into the criteria, I'd like to add in as well for those who have listened to our episode on the JLC reversal, you would see very similar sentiments towards the brand Zenith as well. This is a brand that I think we both very much love, and we both felt that it is very much underrated in the watch world, with the amount of things that have contributed into the watch industry and so on, right? But yeah, let's just get straight into it, right? The very first criteria, as usual, which is it worth it at retail? Similar story as you would hear. Zenith is also a particular brand that has been raising their price, very much so. And if you look at this, and especially in the previous image, as you can see as well, the price is at 5-figure US dollars, right? And with every single piece of Zenith that you would be able to get and walking out the store, you would very much 99.99% lose your money. Right. With that logic and with the same pattern we have been running, it is very much difficult for me to recommend this at retail. Right. And if you're thinking about, let's just say, if I want to compare it retail and I want to look for a automatic chronograph and you really want it brand new, perhaps you can make an argument that you do not have much option. If you really want something that is affordable, brand new at retail only at this particular form factor, maybe, right? Maybe if you are that very minority that has to have your watch brand new. But even then, I would pretty sure you could find someone NOS or something like that, a new old stock that you're able to get that is still brand new, but just not from the retail store, right? And get it at a hefty discount, right? So really, I even if I try to think at that angle, I really can't justify it anyway. So this will be a nil for me. And over to you, Woody.
So I think this is really a case of, and you see it's a common trend to our episodes before already, for those of you who have been following us for now close to 2.5 months now. There is a bit of a inherent bias because we did start off in this hobby at a time where prices were a lot more affordable. And having said that, also, it's a very sad observation. I call this a scenario where when in high tide, all boats rise. Now, why do I say that? When this watch has a integrated automatic chronograph movement that arguably is not inferior to a Rolex Daytona. And when a Rolex Daytona is asking for upwards of 5 figures US dollars, and now I think crossing over to the midpoint already of that, the 10 to 20,000 point, right? Any brand worth their salt cannot actually price themselves lower than that, especially when this movement itself, as James mentioned, used to power the original Zenith powered Daytona, Rolex Daytona as well. So the price increase from a business sense has to be done, but because James and I are familiar with what the prices are, and you also see it in the secondary market. And in full caveat, I bought the one on my wrist for 5,000 US dollars or even less in today's money, right? And that was brand new when the time when no one really knew about it. I can't see how a retail price of 10,000 makes any sense. But then again, I could be living a little bit in the past. There's easy zero for me here. Back to you, James.
Fair enough. To add a little bit of context as well, for those who are not aware, Zenith, I would say even as close as probably 4 years ago, you could probably easily get as much as 30% discount in Malaysia, right? Easily. So that gives you a sense of what we were dealing at. That is prior to the price hike with 30% discount, up to 30%. And now it's with the immense price hike and with less discounts available as well, right? But yeah, that even if I take out all this biasness and stuff, just looking at what's available in the market in terms of value to what you're able to get in terms of value retention and everything, just looking at it all in a holistic view, yeah, it still can't really give much pointers towards buying it at retail, right? That's just unfortunate. But yeah. If I really want to get, if you really want to get something at retail, I would very much suggest you add something to it, get something like a limited edition, or get some, or if you are in the Swiss, you're able to buy a manufacturer edition that can only be purchased at the place where Zenith is manufactured. Right? That's something that will give you a little bit of extra, even though it's essentially the same watch, just a different color scheme, but that could at least pull me closer towards as a justification of buying it at retail. Right. But aside from that, it will be a no for me. Right. And right now, moving on to worth it at the secondary market. Right. So you would see sort of the trend that is happening in our episodes and seeing in terms of when there's a trend coming into a big discrepancy of the retail price and the secondary market, that tends to sway our decision to give this a full mark, right? And in this case, looking at the price with like 10,000 to at retail, 10 to 11,000 retail, depending on which configuration you get, and as cheap as 6,000 at a secondary market for just a 1-2-year-old watch near mint condition. If you really like it, I would say if that's your thing, if chronograph is your thing, and if you like if you support the brand, you like the brand, you like the design, I would say yes, definitely a yes in secondary market, and that should be your sort of like your beeline access to purchasing this watch if you are looking into it, right? Yeah, and I would say that at that particular price, bulk of the depreciation would be already taken off. I can't predict the future, but it will probably still hover around that price, maybe drop a little bit more, but you will not lose much more than that, right? So I would say that, yeah, definitely look at the secondary market if you're looking for a El Primero, right? And there are several different variations available as well. You can pick and choose from there too. So yeah, definitely a big plus for me looking at the secondary market. Over to you, Woody.
Okay, so secondary prices. I think the reality of the matter is the following. As I mentioned at the start of the episode, I did procure mine brand new at about 5,000 US dollars. So when I'm looking at the secondary market, the bias is there. But having said that, you can find prices at 5,000 to about 7,000, depending on how new the model year is and whatnot. And I think that's why it's actually valuable to consider what James mentioned about the retail price as well. If you are going in a retail price, that push as hard for a discount. But if you really can't get something good out of the primary market, the secondary market is where you should find this. Keep in mind that this is a watch that has its history, has a recognition amongst the enthusiasts. So I don't think you will lose a lot more at the secondary market asking prices that you get there. I'll just caveat one little thing before passing it back to James. The servicing of this watch may be a bit more complex than it is for your three-handers or even the more well-known Rolexes and Omega. So you may just want to put that into consideration as part of cost of ownership as well. But otherwise, it's an easy one for me on the secondary market. And I would say this is the place to go if you are looking for a Zenith L Primero. Back to you, James.
Yeah. One more thing to add in on there as well, right? This will be similar on what we mentioned about the secondary market for Grand Seiko. The buyers for this, or the owners of a Zenith watch, is typically going to be watch enthusiasts, right? I mean, the good is that if you buy a Zenith in the secondary market, it's typically going to be well taken care of. The downside of it is that if you do happen to, or if you do think about offloading it in the future, you will probably be you probably need to be a little bit patient, right? The market is going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit more niche. Therefore, it's going to take you a little bit more time to find the right buyer to buy the watch you're going to offload. But if that's not what you're going to think of, you're going to your philosophy is buying it and you're going to keep it in collection forever, then that's something you won't need to worry about. Yeah, but yeah, then for watches like this, it's definitely going to be a little bit more on the niche side lah. All right. So yep. Moving on to the very next criteria, right? Aesthetics, right? I would say that it is very hard to find a watch that does it really well as Zenith in terms of having so many colors, so many complexities, so many stuff going on in a watch, right? Especially it being a chronograph, yet still feels that everything just fits right into place, right? It's the one that started everything, right? Is the one that really makes a very much balanced chronograph, which I'm pretty sure Woody will talk a lot more about that, so I will not mention too much on that. But for me, it's like the colors, right? The colors just work. That three color subdial just turns the watch to a totally different beast, right? And that's something that someone could have. I would say that's a definition of the right amount of pop, right? While still looking incredibly clean and not to mention that three tropical color is going to be iconic and it's going to be timeless, and that something is going to be a conversational starter as well, right? And that it's in my opinion, that is something that Zenith should probably lean a little bit harder to, versus doing all their wacky limited editions and changing out the entire flat monocolor dial with subdials limited editions. That's personally, I think that's just not Zenith's DNA, right? The original is the DNA, and the original works, and the original is the most beautiful in my opinion, and nothing much else to say about that, but it just works and it's beautiful, and you do not see any other brand having something like that, not even close. Right? So yeah, as full marks for me over in aesthetic department. Over to you, Woody.
So I think this is a very interesting one. I'll give you two personal anecdotes. I remember when I got into watches very heavily, now 7-8 years ago now. When I bought this timepiece, and I mentioned it to a couple of people, one being my better half, my wife, and one a close friend of mine, who's had a passing interest in watches, right? It was the watch that made them go like, wait, what is that? You know, it's got a pop, it looks well made, it's classy, it's just so different. You know, I think my wife's exact words was, I didn't know watches could look like that and look good, right? And that tricolor is something that Zenith does really well. And I like what James mentioned, that, you know, when they pivot towards the more basic pandas and whatnot, it sort of loses a bit of that appeal. I think what they've done really well, though, is when they've made I think in the past, there's a grey dial version that maintains the tricolor. There's now recently the black dial, which we put on the visual earlier as well, that those executions are really, really well done. I think this is where that signature of the Zenith, it came from the A386 from the 1969. It still works till today. And so I think the reality of the matter is, aesthetics-wise, it's a great timepiece. And I'll also add one more thing, and this is just in reference to a previous episode we made on the Rolex Daytona. I failed to mention this. James actually told this to me after we've recorded the episode. So if you ever go look at a Rolex Daytona Zenith powered, it aligns the 3 p.m. and 9 p.m. subdial central axis to the hour markers perfectly. It does not have the ridiculous offset that the current modern day Daytona has. So I failed to notice this or bring this up in the previous episode. And James challenged me, is there even a watch that was able to do that, right? Any Zenith powered automatic movement is the one that has that perfect balance across. And the irony of it is, even from an aesthetic standpoint, I think Zenith got it right the first time around, way back in 1969. And then as they tried to update itself in the 90s, it got a bit lost as well. There were versions with major overlaps and all that, right? But I think the current iteration works really well. I will, however, point one thing that I don't really like about the current version of the original Zenith L Primero Chronomaster. It used to be that the seconds hand, the chronograph seconds hand used to run at the way a chronograph seconds hand runs. It doesn't anymore. The current version now runs at 1/10 a second. Really good conversation starter because it flies, right? It cycles that 10 times per second, right? But it's actually not. I will correct myself. It actually, I think it just goes faster than a second per round. So there's a bit of a flair to it when you're looking at it. But I actually find that because of that, what they had to do was they duplicated the internal, the tachymeter internal scale. They have a 1/10 second detail there, and they had to duplicate that twice just to make it usable and keep that visual flair as well. I don't really like that so much. I'm biased towards the previous version, but you know, that requires someone to scrutinize the dial. From a distance, you're not going to notice it. It's just one of those things, but from a aesthetic standpoint, as James mentioned, iconic, conversation starter, still my favorite execution of a automatic dial chronograph, bar none. And this is also why I have so much negative bias against the look of a Daytona. But that's just me. Hot point there. Back to you, James.
Right. Before we move on, right, I think I have a comment on the 110 swap, right? I think Zenith as a brand, they need to relook at their strategy, right? Just looking at how fixated they are on the 110 just tells me that somebody in there doesn't know what they're doing, right? I think a good example is just look at the new Defy Skyline, right? The sub-seconds and so on, it's 110 as well, which is just why. it's just having a 110 for the sake of having a 110. Just differentiation for the sake of having a differentiation. It's like, yes, they are known for the 110, and it's a very good high frequency movement. Is something definitely to be proud of. But you don't need to show it in every single opportunity you have, right? And that particular complementary between showing off and usability needs to make sense, right? At this point, it just feels like it's just being put out there for the sake of being put out there. And yeah, I don't know. I try to ask myself, like, who is this for, right? If you look at it for watch enthusiasts, I don't think they are into it as well. If you're catering this to the more mainstream audience, they don't really care as well. So why? Yeah, so that's my one of my qualms with Zenith as well. I think they just need to go back to the drawing board and see and really look at what they really need to do for the future of the watch brand. Right. So that's one of my thoughts for it. Right. So moving on to the next one, which is horological feature. Right. Um, I don't think I need to talk too much about this as well. Having such an iconic movement, having the particular movement that kickstarted the line of automatic chronograph, in particularly the high frequency movement for chronograph, and gave birth to, I wouldn't say gave birth to the Daytona, but essentially brought the Daytona to the next level. Um, what else can I say, right? It is going to be a full one for me, right? It's a very complete movement that does everything, even has a date in it as well, which is very much nicely placed, which is why I say the aesthetic works when you have such massive amount of things going on to the watch, but it just complements everything really, really well. And you have the movement to back it up as well, a legendary movement nonetheless. Yeah, it's going to be a full mark for me over there. Right, over to you, Woody.
Well, for me, the horological features is fairly simple. It's a wonderful movement. It's still is. In the previous episode when we talked about the spring drive movement, right? And that's the thing that I feel is a bit lost on the current generation, where they are doing the 1/10 of a second almost a flying seconds chronograph already, right? What used to be available, and maybe this is also something which I could have mentioned in the secondary market. If you go further back, there's even more value to be found. I think the 2018, 2019 versions of the watch, you have the classical movement, where if you start the chronograph seconds, it's the closest, aside from the spring drive, to a nice sweep. Because unlike normal watches that are doing it at 3 ticks a second, which you can actually slow down and you pay special attention, you can see it's one of those small things that us enthusiasts look into, right? This one will tick at 5 times each second. So because it's so smooth, you almost don't see that jump at all when the seconds hand move. And I feel that, yes, it's a nice gimmick that the current models have, but I kind of like that older version. But having said that, it is a really nice movement as well. They don't hide it. If you look behind, chronographs are just beautiful to look at from the case back side as well. This one is done fairly well. I would argue manual wind chronographs look even better, but industrial finish still very nice to look at. The complexity is the sort of stuff you don't see in three-handers. There's a pleasure to look at it there. The only caveat I would give this is a watch that is reputed to require some sort of expertise to service. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about it as well. It comes with the territory. I think anyone who is into mechanical marvels will know this. The more complex a movement is, the more skill set required to maintain it. So you just have to factor that in. But so far, many years in, this watch hasn't really given me much of an issue. Just went in once for a service and it's as good as it was when it first came out of the boutique. So easy one for me there. So much history. As a chronograph fan, this ranks so much higher to me than any Daytona ever will. And I think if you call yourself a chronograph fan, you'd be remiss not to pick one of this up versus just aspiring towards that hype beast called a Cosmograph Daytona. But again, another hot take from me. Back to you, James.
Right. I think the very last category that we have is going to be on wearability, right? So if you are in the particular watch scene, you would know that notoriously when you mix these two words together, automatic and chronograph equals thick as hell, right? This is usually the case, right? I would say up to as much as 90% of the case. It's just it's just not common to find a thin enough automatic chronograph watch, right? And the two best example that you can have, which is one over here, the Zenith Chronomaster, and the Daytona, which we have talked about in the previous episode, right? So that aside, that yields a major plus point to the particle variability. However, for the Zenith in particularly, it is still a little bit thick, right? It's one of the best, but not. It could be better, I would say. I think if you looked at versus the Daytona, it's probably 1 mm thicker versus Daytona, right? But nonetheless, if I were to just judge this by its own, it is being in a way layered quite smartly in terms of how they in attempts to hide the thickness. Um, However, the locks are still something that it doesn't really help with the wearability on how it would hug your wrist, versus like the Daytona on how do you have the locks that curves right into it. Even though the Daytona is technically a bigger watch versus this particular Zenith, right? So all in all, I would say that it is a 0.5 for me. It's great. Don't get me wrong. But I would say it could be better. All right. Yeah. Leave it as that. Over to you, Woody.
Well, I'll actually pick apart this even more from where James left off. So I think there is a self-promotion here. If I'll try and find that old post that I did that actually scrutinizes this to death, right? Now, what James is pointing out is very, very true. It's a 38mm watch, has a decent lug to lug of 46 to 47mm, which means that on paper it wears quite well. However, proportionally, it just can't compare to the proportions of a Rolex Daytona. Rolex Daytona really is the king when it comes to that wearability of an automatic chronograph. Now, the other thing that makes it a problem, especially if you are as nuanced as we are as watch enthusiasts, right, is this particular model, the Chronomaster original in 38mm, has lugs that tend to feel like an unidentified floating object. Now, what I mean is, the lugs actually flare upwards from the wrist, and ironically, this was the original design from 1969 as well. So they were just doing a homage, so to speak. But because of that, if you have a small wrist like I do, proud member of the Tiny Wrist Tribe, you will notice that you have a space between the lugs and your wrist. So the wrist actually floats above the wrist, and the old models of the Speedmaster used to have this problem as well. So I think from a wearability standpoint, on paper, it works fairly well. In fact, I would say that if you have a bigger wrist, it works even better because the natural way that the straps or bracelet will go down will wrap around your wrist really well. But if you happen to be operating in the space that I normally do, much smaller, you will notice that the current model, there's an unusual gap that appears when there's almost a perpendicular shape that you form between the strap bracelet versus the case, right? You actually see a space there. It doesn't work as well as I'd like, but very hard to find automatic chronographs that wear well on the small wrist. So I was a bit charitable. I gave a 0.5 here as well. But there are these nuances. So I do recommend if you're looking for at this watch, try it in store first before you decide. It's one of those that on paper you will not see these nuances. I'll try and find the old post that I did to give you the exact visual details. But just one of those things that us as real watch enthusiasts tend to scrutinize to death. Back to you, James.
Right. Oh, okay. So I need to also put in a caveat here, right? When we say 0.5 here, it's just basically just how our scoring criteria works because it's either a 0, 0.5, or a 1, right? If I were to give it like a percentage versus all other available automatic chronograph, right? It is very much up there. It is probably number 2. If the Daytona is number 1, this is going to be number 2, right? So it is up there. Don't get me wrong. It's just not perfect. But when I say it's not perfect, it's very close to be perfect, right? So therefore, it gets a 0.5 over here for scoring matters. But I would say if you're looking for a automatic chronograph and for wearability purpose, if not the Daytona, this is the one, right? I don't see any other close comparison. If you look at the big brother of the Chronomaster Sport, there's where even bigger, right? It's huge in comparison to this. So yeah, I got to state that caveat out for you guys. All right. Anyways, so that pretty much sums up our score, which I'm pretty sure is the first time that we have exact identical score on both Woody and I. But yeah, that's what it is. So that brings it out to a total of 7 out of 10, right? A very, very, very reputable chronograph watch, and it's something that pretty much you can say that we recommend if you're able to find one at a price on the secondary market and you really know what you're getting yourself into and you really love the brand and you really want a, I would say, a legendary a chronograph watch. If you get a deal, the price is right, look no further. All right. We definitely recommend for you to get one if it falls or if all this respective criteria. But yeah, aside from that, I hope you enjoyed the episode and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Bye.